The students stared as Ethan Aldren walked through the gleaming glass doors of Zoctor Intergalactic Academy. Whispers trailed behind him like a comet's tail. The first human ever admitted to the galaxy's most prestigious school was hard to miss. His gait was confident but awkwardly Earth-like, his expression a mix of curiosity and discomfort as he took in the sight of towering, bioluminescent corridors and floating instructional drones. Some students with scales shimmered under the artificial light, while others, translucent and jelly-like, bobbed along beside classmates with crystalline exoskeletons. Ethan tried not to stare too much, but failing to stare was an impossible task when surrounded by beings straight out of Earth's wildest sci-fi depictions. He clutched his entry tablet tightly, already aware that this school was a place where everyone would be smarter, faster, and more advanced than him. But he also couldn't deny the thrill of being here. He was representing humanity well, kind of. His mother had insisted on that narrative, even as she had packed his bags with snacks because space food might not agree with your stomach. Ethan didn't argue with her on that one. He hadn't argued much about anything since he'd received the acceptance notice, a glowing sphere that floated through his window one night and recited, in a dozen galactic languages, his invitation. His mother had just smiled, too broadly for his liking, and encouraged him to accept without hesitation. He'd been too distracted by his excitement to question why her enthusiasm had seemed slightly off. Now, as a floating drone approached him, projecting a rotating orb of light and sound that announced, Ethan Aldren, Section 9, Advanced Adaptation Class, he felt the weight of 100 alien eyes or sensory appendages focused squarely on him. "Good luck," human muttered a spiny creature passing by, its voice resonant like a gong. Ethan wasn't sure if it was sarcasm or genuine goodwill, but he gave a nervous smile in return and stepped into the assigned classroom. The room was like nothing he'd ever seen. Gravity-defying desks hovered mid-air, adapting their height and shape for the unique anatomies of each student. Screens materialized from thin air, responding to thought commands, and the teacher, a floating orb of shifting colors, was already engaged in a heated discussion with a student who resembled a sentient tree. "Ah, the human," the teacher intoned as Ethan entered. Its colors shifted to a soft green, signaling, as Ethan would later learn, mild curiosity. "Please take your seat." Ethan hesitated, then approached an empty desk. As soon as he sat, it adjusted itself, contouring perfectly to his body. He muttered a quiet, cool, earning a few chuckles, or the alien equivalent of chuckles, from his classmates. The lesson began immediately, diving into theories of multidimensional adaptation and environmental resilience. Ethan quickly realized he was out of his depth. The teacher's explanations were layered with concepts he'd never encountered, and his fellow students raised their appendages or equivalent limbs to answer questions before he even understood what was being asked. At lunch, Ethan found himself sitting alone at a table in the corner of the sprawling cafeteria. The food options were a kaleidoscope of textures, colors, and smells, most of which he couldn't identify. He stuck to the blandest-looking option, a grayish cube, and tried to ignore the stares. "Hey, human!" a voice snapped him out of his brooding. He looked up to see a lanky, cat-like alien with iridescent fur sliding onto the bench across from him. "You're new, so let me give you some advice. Don't eat the gray stuff. It's a laxative for anyone without triple stomachs." Ethan froze, the half-chewed cube in his mouth suddenly tasting even worse. He spat it into a napkin and grimaced. "Thanks." Zirak the alien replied, grinning in a way that showed too many teeth. "And you're Ethan, right? The talk of the academy." "Talk of the academy," Ethan muttered, slumping in his seat. "I thought I could just blend in." Zirak laughed, a chirping sound. "Blend in? You're the first human here. Everyone's dying to know how you got in. Did you invent something? Solve an interstellar problem? Or are humans just secretly geniuses and you've been hiding it from the galaxy?" Ethan flushed. "None of the above. I'm just normal." "Normal?" Zirak tilted his head, clearly skeptical. "Then how'd you ace the entrance trials? Those things are brutal." Ethan frowned. "Entrance trials? I didn't take any trials. They just sent me an acceptance sphere." Zirak's ears twitched. "Weird. Everyone takes the trials. even the Zolrins and their literal hive minds. Ethan's unease grew, but he forced a shrug. Maybe they made an exception. For diversity or something. Maybe Zyrak said, though his tone was doubtful. Well, stick with me, human. I'll help you survive this place. Ethan gave a weak smile. Thanks. I'll take all the help I can get. Over the next few weeks, Ethan struggled to keep up with his classes. His fellow students excelled effortlessly, while he barely grasped the basics. Zyrak became his unofficial guide, helping him navigate the labyrinthine campus and avoid inadvertently insulting anyone's culture, a real risk, given the sheer number of species represented. But strange things started happening. During a particularly grueling physical training session, Ethan found himself outperforming some of the more athletic students. When the instructor, a hulking insectoid, set the gravity levels to twice Earth's, Ethan expected to collapse like most of his classmates. Instead, he adapted almost instantly, his body adjusting as though it were second nature. Impressive, the instructor said, its mandibles clicking in approval. Ethan, drenched in sweat, could only nod weakly. Then there were the dreams. They started as vague flashes, images of unfamiliar stars, alien landscapes, and a shadowy figure that spoke in a language Ethan didn't recognize but somehow understood. The dreams left him restless, and he began waking up with a strange sense of longing, as though something deep within him was trying to surface. One evening, while studying in the library, he stumbled upon a holographic map of galactic territories. As he scanned the glowing display, a section lit up, unprompted. The name of the region, Aldren cluster, triggered a jolt of recognition, though he couldn't explain why. He reached out to touch the hologram, and the map reacted, zooming in on a specific star system. Words appeared: home of the Aldren line. What the Ethan whispered, pulling his hand back as if burned. You okay? Zyrak asked, appearing beside him with a tray of snacks. Yeah, Ethan said quickly, shutting off the display. But his mind raced. He had never heard of the Aldren line, yet the words felt intimately familiar. And why had the map reacted to him? The questions gnawed at him, but he had no answers. For the first time, he wondered if his mother had known more about his acceptance to the academy than she had let on. The questions swirling in Ethan's mind refused to let him rest. That night, after tossing and turning in bed, he made up his mind. He needed answers. His mother had to know something. Why else would she have seemed so uncharacteristically eager for him to leave Earth? He grabbed his communicator and initiated a secure transmission. The screen blinked, and after a moment, his mother's familiar face appeared. She looked a little frazzled, as though she'd been caught mid-task. Ethan? Honey, is everything all right? She asked, her tone laced with concern. I'm fine, Ethan replied quickly. But I need to ask you something, and I want the truth. Her expression faltered. Ethan, what's going on? Are you in trouble? No, but something weird's been happening. Things I can't explain. And today I found something about the Aldren line in the library here. Does that mean anything to you? His mother's face froze, her features tightening like a drawn bowstring. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before she finally spoke. Ethan, listen to me, she said carefully. There are things I didn't tell you, things I thought you didn't need to know. I wanted you to have a normal life. Normal, Ethan echoed, incredulous. You sent me to an alien academy. How is that normal? She sighed, rubbing her temples. I didn't think it would come up so soon, but I should have known it might. Ethan, your father wasn't from Earth. Ethan's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Like, not human? Yes, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. He was an alien. From the Aldren cluster. I met him during my time working at the Space Research Station. He was brilliant, kind, and unlike anyone I'd ever met. But he had responsibilities, and we couldn't stay together. And you just decided not to tell me? Ethan's voice rose in disbelief. You thought I'd be fine going through life without knowing I'm half alien? I thought it was safer for you not to know, she shot back. Your father's heritage is complicated, Ethan. His family is powerful old. They have their own traditions, their own politics. I didn't want you dragged into all of that. Ethan sank back in his chair, his mind reeling. He had so many questions he didn't know where to start. So, this academy, did they know? Is that why I got in? I suspect they do, she admitted. Your father told me once that your bloodline carried unique traits, things that might surface under certain conditions. I think they've been watching you. Watching me? Ethan thought, a chill running down his spine. You should have told me, Mom. I know, she said softly, her voice full of regret. I didn't want you to feel different. I wanted you to have a chance to just be you. Well, too late for that, he muttered, ending the call before she could respond. He sat in silence for a long time, staring at the communicator. His mother's words echoed in his head. Half alien, unique traits. It explained a lot: his strange adaptability, the dreams, even the Academy's mysterious invitation. But it didn't make him feel any better. If anything, it made him feel more out of place than ever. The next day, Ethan couldn't focus in class. His thoughts kept drifting back to what his mother had said. His alien heritage, his father's mysterious family, the cryptic message on the holographic map, it all seemed to be connected, but he had no idea how. Earth to Ethan, Zyrak's voice snapped him out of his daze. His feline friend was poking at his arm with a clawed finger. You've been staring at the same page for 10 minutes. What's up? Ethan hesitated. He hadn't told Zyrak anything about his discovery, but if anyone could help him make sense of this mess, it was probably his sarcastic, hyper-curious roommate. Can we talk somewhere private? Ethan asked. Zyrak's ears perked up. Ooh, mysterious. Sure, let's go. They slipped out of the classroom and found an empty lounge area. Once they were seated, Ethan told Zyrak everything: his conversation with his mother, the map, even the strange abilities he'd been experiencing. When he finished, Zyrak stared at him, wide-eyed. You're serious? Dead serious, Ethan replied, and I have no idea what to do about it. Zyrak leaned back, his tail twitching thoughtfully. Okay, first off, this explains a lot. Like how you can handle double gravity like it's nothing. Or how you somehow didn't get melted by that acid rain during survival training. Wait, what? Ethan blinked. That was acid rain. Yeah. Didn't you notice everyone else running for cover? You just stood there like an idiot. Ethan groaned, running a hand through his hair. Great. So I'm some kind of mutant freak. Mutant freak? No way, Zyrak said, grinning. You're awesome. Do you know how rare it is to have Oridan heritage? Those guys are practically legends. I mean, sure, they're a little intense, but still. Intense? How? Ethan asked warily. Well, for starters, they're obsessed with power and tradition, Zyrak explained. The Oridan clans are all about proving their worth physically, mentally, politically. They've ruled parts of the galaxy for centuries. If you're part of that bloodline, it's a big deal. Great, Ethan muttered. So now I'm supposed to live up to some ancient alien family legacy I didn't even know I had. Zyrak shrugged. Could be worse. At least you're not boring. Ethan rolled his eyes but couldn't help smirking a little. Thanks, Zyrak. That really puts it in perspective. Anytime, buddy. Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into research, determined to learn more about the Oridan clans. With Zyrak's help, he scoured the Academy's library and archives, piecing together fragments of information about his father's people. He learned that the Oridan were known for their adaptability and resilience, traits that had made them formidable warriors and leaders, but they were also secretive, fiercely protective of their bloodlines, and notoriously difficult to understand. As Ethan dug deeper, he began to notice changes in himself. His senses grew sharper, his reflexes quicker. He started to excel in classes that had previously baffled him, grasping concepts with an ease that surprised even his teachers. It was as though something inside him had awakened, unlocking abilities he hadn't known he possessed. But the more he discovered about his heritage, the more questions arose. Why had his father left? Why had the Academy invited him now? and what would happen when the Oridan clans found out about him. Because one thing was becoming increasingly clear: they would find out. And when they did, Ethan's life would never be the same. Ethan's instincts were sharper than ever, and they told him one thing with unrelenting certainty: his time of anonymity was running out. The Academy's sprawling halls now felt charged, as if every glance, every whispered word was a prelude to something larger. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him more closely than ever. His suspicions were confirmed late one evening. While returning to his dorm after a long study session, Ethan heard the faintest hum behind him, a sound too subtle for most to notice. He stopped and turned, but the corridor was empty. Still, the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He resumed walking, his pace quickening, and turned another corner only to find himself face to face with a tall figure cloaked in dark, shimmering fabric. "Ethan Aldren," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. Ethan instinctively took a step back. "Who's asking?" The figure lowered its hood, revealing a face both familiar and alien. Its features were sharp, symmetrical, and regal, with eyes that glowed faintly, silver eyes eerily similar to the ones Ethan saw in the mirror every morning. "I am Kale," the figure said, "and I've been sent to bring you home." Ethan frowned, his heart pounding. "Home? What are you talking about? I already have a home." Kale tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You misunderstand. Your true home, Ethan. With the Oridan clans. Your bloodline cannot remain hidden any longer." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ethan snapped, backing away. "I don't even know you." Kale's expression remained calm, though his glowing eyes hardened slightly. "I understand your reluctance. But this is not a request. It is your destiny. The clans have waited long enough for your return." Before Ethan could respond, Kale raised a hand, and the air around Ethan seemed to ripple. Ethan's instincts screamed danger, and without thinking, he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a crackling pulse of energy. His heart raced as adrenaline surged through him. "Impressive," Kale said, his tone almost approving. "Your instincts are awakening. Good, you'll need them." Ethan scrambled to his feet, glaring at Kale. "Stay away from me." But before Kale could respond, a blur of motion erupted from the shadows, colliding with him. It was Zyrak, his claws extended, hissing fiercely as he tackled Kale to the ground. "Run," Zyrak shouted, his fur bristling. "I'll hold him off." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before bolting down the corridor. He could hear the sounds of struggle behind him, grunts, hisses, and the crackle of energy pulses, but he didn't look back. His mind raced as he tried to figure out where to go. The Academy was massive, but nowhere felt truly safe. He rounded a corner and nearly collided with another figure, a stern-looking professor with pale blue skin and elongated limbs. "Mr. Aldren," the professor said sharply, catching Ethan by the shoulders. "What's going on?" "There's someone after me," Ethan panted. "He said he's here to take me to the Oridan clans." The professor's eyes widened slightly, and she muttered something in a language Ethan didn't recognize. Then she straightened and said, "Follow me, quickly." She led Ethan through a series of winding corridors, eventually arriving at a locked door. She pressed her hand to a panel, and the door slid open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with strange, humming devices. "What is this place?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "A secure location," the professor replied, "for situations exactly like this." Ethan stared at her. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "We suspected it might. Your presence here was not an accident." "Not an accident," Ethan repeated, his anger rising. "You mean this whole thing was a setup?" "Not exactly," she said, her tone careful. "Your acceptance was genuine, but it was also deliberate. The Academy has long-standing agreements with the Oridan clans. We monitor potential heirs, prepare them for their roles. You were meant to discover your heritage gradually, but it seems the clans have decided to intervene." "Intervene," Ethan said bitterly. "They sent some guy to kidnap me." The professor frowned. "Kale was here? That complicates things. He's one of their enforcers. They take loyalty to the clans very seriously. Ethan sank into a nearby chair, his head spinning. This can't be happening. I just wanted to learn, maybe make a name for myself. I didn't ask for any of this. The professor's expression softened slightly. I understand how overwhelming this must be. But you have a choice, Ethan. You can embrace your heritage, or you can fight it. Either way, the Oridon clans will not ignore you now. You've already drawn their attention. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. He didn't want to be part of some ancient alien dynasty, but deep down, he couldn't deny the curiosity burning inside him. Who was his father? What did it mean to be part of the Aldren line? And could he really run from it forever? Before he could respond, the door hissed open again, and Zyrek stumbled inside, panting heavily. His fur was singed in places, and one of his ears was bent at an odd angle. Kale's gone, Zyrek said, collapsing onto a nearby bench. For now, anyway. But he'll be back. Ethan looked at his battered friend, then at the professor. What happens if I don't go with them? They'll keep coming, the professor said grimly. The Oridon clans do not take no for an answer. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands clenching into fists. He didn't like being pushed around, and he didn't trust Kale or the clans, but he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. If he wanted to understand who he was and what he was capable of, he would have to confront his heritage head-on. All right, he said finally. If they want me, they can have me, but on my terms. The academy felt quieter than usual the next morning, as though the air itself held its breath. Ethan sat in his dorm, staring out the window at the twin suns rising over the academy's shimmering towers. Zyrek lounged nearby, his tail flicking lazily as he munched on a snack. You really think this plan will work? Zyrek asked, breaking the silence. It has to, Ethan replied, though his voice betrayed his nerves. I can't just let them keep coming for me. If they want me, they'll have to deal with me on equal ground. Zyrek snorted. Bold. I like it. But you realize you're walking into the lion's den, right? Yeah, Ethan said, turning to face him. But I have to know the truth. If I'm going to deal with the Oridon clans, I need to understand what I'm up against. Zyrek nodded, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Just don't forget who you are, okay? You're Ethan Aldren, not some shiny Oridon prince. Don't let them change that. Ethan smiled faintly. Thanks, Zyrek. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. The professor stepped inside, her expression stern but approving. They're waiting, she said simply. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding as he stood. Zyrek gave him an encouraging thumbs up or the closest equivalent with his clawed hand. The professor led Ethan to a secure docking bay, where a sleek, obsidian spacecraft awaited. Its design was unlike anything Ethan had seen before, smooth and organic, as though it were a living thing. Kale stood at the base of the ramp, his silver eyes watching Ethan closely. You've made the right decision, Kale said as Ethan approached. We'll see about that, Ethan replied coolly. Kale gave a faint smile, but there was a flicker of something in his expression. Approval, perhaps? He gestured for Ethan to board, and Ethan followed him up the ramp, his resolve hardening with each step. The interior of the ship was just as alien as its exterior, with flowing, bioluminescent walls and control panels that responded to touch and thought. Kale guided Ethan to a seat, then took his place at the controls. Moments later, the ship lifted off, and the academy disappeared below them. Ethan stared out the window as the stars blurred into streaks of light. He tried to focus on the task ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to his mother's words, to the secrets she had kept, and to the father he had never known. Who had this man been? And what had he left behind for Ethan to inherit? The journey to the Oridon homeworld was surprisingly brief, thanks to the ship's advanced technology. As they emerged from hyperspace, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The planet before them was a dazzling sphere of silver and green, its surface shimmering as though it were covered in liquid metal. Rings of energy spiraled around it, and fleets of ships patrolled its orbit. Welcome to Oridia, Kale said, his tone almost reverent. Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the planet as they descended through its atmosphere. The surface was a breathtaking blend of towering crystalline cities, sprawling bioluminescent forests, and rivers of glowing energy. It was both alien and strangely familiar, as though some part of him had always known this place. The ship landed smoothly on a platform overlooking a vast cityscape. A group of figures awaited them, tall, regal, and unmistakably Oridan. Their silver eyes and elegant features mirrored Kale's, but their expressions were colder, more calculating. Ethan Aldren, one of them, said as he stepped forward. He wore a robe of shimmering fabric that seemed to shift colors as he moved. "Welcome home." "Let's get one thing straight," Ethan said, stepping off the ship with as much confidence as he could muster. "This isn't home, not yet." The man arched an eyebrow, clearly amused. Spoken like a true Aldren. "I am Tyrion, leader of the Oridan High Council, and you, young one, are the heir to a legacy far greater than you can imagine." Ethan folded his arms. "I didn't come here to be told who I am. I came here for answers. About my father. About why you're so interested in me." Tyrion's expression softened slightly, though his eyes remained piercing. "Your father, Kaelor Aldren, was one of the greatest among us. A visionary, a leader, and a protector of our people. But he chose a different path, a path that led him away from Auredia and toward the stars." "Why?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. "Because he believed in unity," Tyrion replied. "He saw potential in humanity, in bridging the gap between our species. And when he met your mother, he found a kindred spirit. But his decision to leave Auredia came at a cost. He knew that his legacy would pass to you, and he hoped that one day you would find your way here." Ethan's chest tightened. "And what if I don't want this legacy? What if I just want to live my own life?" Tyrion regarded him for a long moment. "You are free to choose your path, Ethan. But know this: the Oridan clans face challenges that only someone of your lineage can overcome. Your unique heritage makes you a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what we could become. Deny your legacy, and you deny not just your father's dream, but the future of our people." Ethan looked away, struggling to process the weight of Tyrion's words. He had spent his entire life feeling ordinary, only to discover that he was anything but. Now, the fate of an entire species, or perhaps multiple species, was being laid at his feet. "I need time to think," he said finally. Tyrion nodded. "Of course. Take the time you need. But know that time is not infinite. The challenges we face will not wait forever." Over the next few days, Ethan explored Auredia, learning about its culture, its history, and its people. He saw firsthand the strength and resilience of the Oridan clans, but he also saw their flaws, their rigidity, their obsession with tradition, their struggles to adapt to a changing galaxy. He spent hours in the Hall of Records, poring over holographic archives that chronicled his father's life. He saw images of Kaelor as a young leader, inspiring his people with his vision of unity. And he saw images of his mother, smiling beside him, her human presence a bold declaration of his ideals. By the time Ethan returned to the council chamber, he felt more certain of his path. The council members watched him expectantly as he entered, their silver eyes glinting in the soft light. "I've made my decision," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I won't deny my heritage. But I'm not going to let it define me either. If I'm going to be part of the Oridan clans, we're doing this my way. No more secrecy. No more clinging to old traditions. If we're going to move forward, we do it together. As equals." Tyrion's expression was unreadable for a moment, but then he smiled, a genuine, approving smile. "Spoken like your father. Welcome home, Ethan Aldren." For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to smile back. Maybe this wasn't what he had planned for his life. But as he stood in the council chamber, surrounded by a people who were both strangers and family, he realized something: this wasn't just his father's legacy. It was his own, and he was ready to claim it.